Hello, good evening, and welcome. My name is Julie Shields-Ratina, and I am the Director of College Planning at MEFA. And thank you for joining us tonight for MEFA's Family Webinar Series. And the topic tonight is a very popular one, college financing. And there are a lot of you with us tonight. We're thrilled to have you. This series that we're doing for families, you can find all of our events at mefa.org/events. And this particular webinar, we're doing 4 times a week, starting this week all the way through November 6th. So you can share that with friends or others who might find this useful. Tonight, we're really fortunate to have our guest presenter, Gail Holt, who is the Dean of Financial Aid at Amherst College. And she'll tell you a little bit more about her background, but what I will say is that she's such an expert in this topic, and I know you'll learn a lot. We have muted all of you for the purposes of keeping background noise down, all of that. But on the right of your screen, you'll see that there's a question box. And if you have questions as the webinar goes along, please feel free to type those questions in. And I will be reviewing those questions, keeping track of those questions, and we will definitely try to cover a lot of those at the end. Maybe I can even answer a few behind the scenes, or if it's something that's relevant to what Gail's talking about that I think everyone else could benefit from in the moment, Gail, I'll interrupt you and we can go from there. So please ask your questions. I will also tell you, if you're listening to this on your phone, just know you have to swipe right or left to either see our faces or the slides. So if you want to see the slides as Gail is presenting, make sure you swipe to the side. And also, tomorrow we will follow up with and send you the recording, and also send you the handouts. So you'll have all of those materials. And I think that is all the housekeeping. So I guess I'll just tell you a little bit about MEFA too. If you don't know MEFA has been around since 1982 here in Massachusetts. And we have the state's 2 savings programs, college savings programs, the U Plan and the U Fund. And we also have low interest loans for families who need to take a private loan to help finance college. And then everything else we do really supports our mission, and we really just work to give guidance to families with students of every age, babies to college graduates, on the whole college process. And so our mission is really to help families plan, save, and pay for college. And this important work around the financial aid process is an important way that we do that. So thank you again for joining us. And Gail, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. I always enjoy doing this seminar, so it's great to be doing it again, although it's quite different doing it from home. I always love getting out in front of families and being able to see your faces. So I'm sorry that that's not the case today, but you know, we are going to go through some hopefully helpful topics. It is hard to make financial aid fun. It's probably even a little bit harder in a webinar format, but I really do hope that through this webinar, we can equip you with the resources to be informed and empowered. I've been working in financial aid for the past 25 years. I've started my career at Boston University. I've also worked at Northeastern University, Mount Holyoke College, and now I've been at Amherst College for the past 7.5 years. So I've been speaking from a professional standpoint for those past 25 years. But as of this past year, I can also add my personal experience with the financial aid process. So I may be the only person that whose child can say that in completing the FAFSA that I actually found it fun. She said, you're actually enjoying this, aren't you? And I said yes, actually. Going through it helps give a new appreciation for all that you are going through as parents. So I will try to add my my tips and my guidance as we go, but know that you can get through this. Yes, it's complex. Yes, it's a lot to learn, but you absolutely can do it. So as the opening act to the presidential debate tonight, I hope to be at least informative and a whole lot less controversial, hopefully. So we're going to start with the types and sources of financial aid tonight. And we're just going to start with the basics about, what is financial aid? Essentially, as you can imagine, it's the resources that you'll need to help pay for college, which there's plenty of press about how expensive college is. There's three main types. Of course, the most common is the grant and scholarships, and that's gift money that does not need to be repaid and is the most sought after resource in financial aid. Federal work study is a way that students can earn money while they're on campus. So it doesn't credit their bill, but most students will use work study as a way to earn money toward their personal expenses while they're on campus. So as a parent, if you're working hard to cover the billed expenses, then maybe the student can use work study to cover their other expenses while they're on campus. This is really beyond money. This is a great resource to connect with other adults at the college or university that your child's attending. They understand your students' priorities. And so I do encourage it as an opportunity to, expand their resources while they're at school. Student loans are also a form of financial aid, and one of the biggest questions we usually get is, how could student loans possibly be financial aid? The reality is that these federal student loans come with a variety of benefits for students that they would just otherwise not be able to benefit from. Most entities would not be willing to lend a 17 or an 18-year-old thousands of dollars without any questions asked. But we'll get into the details of these federal student loans, and you'll learn a little bit more about that as we go. These sources, the financial aid and the types that I just mentioned, come from a variety of sources. There is no, silver bullet when it comes to financing higher education, regardless of what the cost is. So it really takes the partnership with families, but also with outside and other entities. The federal government provides grants and loans and work study and tax incentives to families, as well as the state of Massachusetts and some other states if you happen to live outside of Massachusetts. The colleges and universities are probably the largest contributor of financial aid in the process, and also many outside agencies. So it's great that scholarships, and so many scholarships, are available to students throughout the country and the state. I encourage students to look for those scholarships and look for the ones close to home because they're the most likely to be offered. Scholarships through churches and that the guidance community offers in websites, community organizations, sometimes parents' employers. So there's a lot of great opportunities out there. Another one that I'll highlight that's fairly new at this moment is the College Board has what's called opportunity scholarships, and the website is opportunity.collegeboard.org. And that scholarship in particular is not about achievement, but it's actually about completing the steps to apply for financial aid and apply to college. So just by going through your normal daily activities in terms of getting to college, students can qualify for scholarships. So I highly encourage you to check that out and see if that's a resource that could be available. So we'll start talking about loans. Basically, the reason we talk about loans is because it's the single biggest resource that students do use for higher education, and that's because absolutely any student can access federal student loans. There is no credit check. The student is the only borrower. And this is a way that students can start to take some financial responsibility and investment in their education. The loans come in a form that are either subsidized or unsubsidized. And the difference there is that for the subsidized loan, which is based on financial need, the taxpayers, those of us that are paying taxes, contribute and pay the interest on these loans. The unsubsidized loans are, the interest is then assumed by the student borrower. It's not paid necessarily immediately, but that's the distinction between those two loan types. The interest rates are often lower than commercial, lending rates. So students can use these resources while they're enrolled, and then can, begin to repay them back after they're enrolled. They're typically, 10 years long in their repayment. And the amounts that a student can borrow are limited by their year in school, so by their number of credits, which is to keep the total indebtedness for any one student to a modest amount. So often we'll get the question, what is the best maximum amount in terms that a student should borrow for education? There are industry averages, which would be around, $28,000 according to some entities. Some students will borrow more than that. Hopefully, many students will borrow far less. But one resource that I would encourage you to check out as you're looking at schools is you can see the average indebtedness for students and graduating students from that institution online. So I encourage you to kind of look at that just as a measure of kind of student behavior at institutions that you're looking at. But overall, the terms and options that these student loans carry offer favor to students in terms of being able to defer their loans, sometimes forbearance or forgiveness opportunities. So, they really are a part of a comprehensive financing plan. So now we'll get into the gift money, the free money, the money that everybody wants. And then once we get through this, we'll pause for some questions. The merit-based aid is awarded not by every single college, but some colleges in recognition of a variety of talents that students carry. Sometimes those are academic talents, sometimes they're athletic or artistic. And so they really are a good way for students that may not qualify for need-based financial aid to still access resources to help finance their education. And most of this merit-based aid does come directly from the institution, and that's because institutions are trying to encourage certain populations to attend their school. So what I would suggest is, if you're really looking for merit-based aid, when you're looking at institutions, look at the kinds of students and the kinds of programs that they offer to see if there might be a match there. Oftentimes the merit-based scholarships are renewable, but they are not required to be renewable. And you definitely want to pay attention to deadlines and the like. The more common form of grant and gift aid is in the form of need-based aid. So this is what is based on a family's financial eligibility and their actual need for financial aid. This is based on a standardized formula, and we'll talk a little bit about those two formulas. There's a federal formula and an institutional formula, depending on the school that the student's being applying to or being considered by. But it is that standard formula to provide equity in the process. that allows an institution to decide how are they going to allocate the resources that they have available. So in theory, you know, that standardized formula then would be the same across all institutions, but because resources can vary, sometimes that formula can be either more or less, you know, generous in the process. So that's what leads to differences in the financial award packages that students ultimately are presented with. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works as we get into the process for consideration. But almost always, you know, there is an academic component that if need-based aid is being granted by the federal government or the state government or an institution, they're expecting a student to continue to make academic progress. And so there are requirements that students need to maintain in order to maintain their financial aid eligibility. So, Julie, are there any you know, important clarifying questions that I didn't hit on before we head into the application process?
Not on what you've covered, so we're good to go for now.
So, okay. And so we're going to start with the process. You know, what do you need to do? The first thing that's critical to know is, what is the timeline? Generally speaking, you want to be thinking that applying for financial aid happens at about the same time that your child is applying for admission. So it is a concurrent process. And you want to know what the school's deadlines are so that you can start that process, start recording. I find that students are applying to so many colleges at this point, it's hard to keep it all straight. So what worked for me was a spreadsheet laying out the colleges, laying out their deadlines, laying out what kind of forms they require, what their deadlines, you know, are. So it is a lot to manage, that is for sure. And you know, if your student's willing to do it, that's great. If you can help support them in the process, I know that they have a lot on their plates as well. But you do want to be sure to meet those application due dates as quickly as possible. You know, we are, as financial aid folks, we're moving through this process as quickly as we can. Resources are limited, and at some schools, you know, resources will, you know, will be exhausted. Now, to that end, we're going to talk tonight about the start of the application being right around the corner this week on Thursday. That doesn't mean that you need to have the applications filed on the first day. You do have time. Just pay attention to the due dates. And it's great that MEFA has always been a great partner in providing resources. So we'll mention a few resources tonight, but the application manager is certainly one of the key ones. So the first application that everybody should know about is the free application for federal student aid. It's called the FAFSA, and as is included in the name, it is free. So if you get to any site, any website that's asking for money relative to the FAFSA, you know, pay us $400 and we'll file the form for you. Trust me when I say you do not need to do that. You can complete this application on your own and should not pay anything to complete the FAFSA. The FAFSA is used by any college that is awarding federal dollars to a student, and it is the only application that colleges can use to distribute federal financial aid. So if you're only applying for federal aid, the FAFSA is the only application that you need to submit. It's not the only piece of the process, and I'll talk about that, but it is required by all colleges. So as I started to allude to, it opens up this week on Thursday, and the way you get there is through FAFSA.gov. There is a mobile app. I'm not sure, certainly if you don't have a computer, then it absolutely is a great way to go, whether you have an iPad or an iPhone. But if you have a computer or have access to the library, I do encourage you to use the computer. One of the actions that you can take right now is to log in with an FSA ID. So that ID is actually your electronic signature for completing the FAFSA. And you go to a slightly different website, the FSAID.ed.gov, that's on the screen and will be in the materials that Julie sends tomorrow. And that, again, is something that you can apply for and obtain now. And both the parent and the student need this ID because it's the electronic signature. It's also an electronic signature that's going to be used for other things in the financial aid process. So as much as parents often want to do this whole process for their student, I do encourage you to include the student in applying for their own FSA ID. If it makes you feel better to have them do it sitting next to you, that's a good idea. But it's important for them to know kind of the importance of this in the process. And what often happens is that when parents apply, they use information that the student doesn't totally know about. And then when the student is trying to, let's say, do something in my office later on in the academic year, they don't have the information they need. They don't know what the secret questions were or the answers to the secret questions. So it's just better to have your student apply for it and then have them, give you the information if that's what you need. We'll also talk about the IRS data retrieval tool. This is a fantastic way to eliminate some of the mistakes that are common in completing the FAFSA. This is a tool that allows you to directly connect to the IRS, pull in your tax data, and have it all in the right spots. So we will we'll hit on that as we go. And MEFA, has a FAFSA webinar if you want to get into more detail about that. Another great resource that I'll hit on at the end is every year there's an event called FAFSA Day in Massachusetts, and that's an opportunity for financial aid professionals from across the state to help families one-on-one. That has happened in the past, one in person, but this year it will still happen virtually. And so if you're form phobic or just really worried about completing the form or just want assurances that you've done it right, look for that information as well. So what do you put on this mysterious FAFSA application? Well, you start with general information. And so the first thing that I'll say is that as you're filling out these applications, it's important to remember this is actually the student's application. So they're filling out this application for the academic year that they're going to attend. And so the FAFSA that becomes available on Thursday is for the 2020-2021 academic year. And it will ask for information from both the student and the parents. But remember, when the application is asking for you, they mean the student. It also asks for basic information like the Social Security number, what colleges the student is applying to. So you can list up to 10 at any one point in time. And then some basic general information about who does the student live with. Do they live with parents? Are the parents, living together? Are they married? In the case of parents who live together and married, then both parents are reporting their information on the form. And if a student has biological parents that are not married, but they're living together, even though they're not married, they're still going to be listing their information. When parents are not currently married to each other, then it would be the student's custodial parent. So the parent that the student lives with should be completing the FAFSA. We'll talk about the non-custodial in just a little bit. That would be the parent that the student does not live with. But even if a parent is remarried, and the student lives with the parent and the step parent, both of those individuals will be listed on the FAFSA. In this particular case with the FAFSA, if a student is under guardianship, the legal guardians are not considered a parent, but we'll also distinguish there when we get to a different application. And then the FAFSA is going to collect financial information. So what you want to be mindful of regarding the financial information is that for ease, for families, the FAFSA asks for trailing income information. So in the application year that's coming up, in the 21-22 application year, and I just said 2021 just a moment ago. So you know, as financial aid professionals, we kind of operate in several years at a time, and so it's easy to get confused. We are in the 2021 year at this moment, but students are applying for the 21-22, which is not far away. So the income, though, that's going to be reported there is the 2019 income information. And that may seem, with the year that we've had, that may seem a lifetime ago, and it may seem like a totally different situation. But I encourage you to make sure you have access to that 2019 information. And I'll just put a quick plug in right now that if your financial situation has changed dramatically between 2019 and 2020, I encourage you to prepare to complete your 2020 tax return as early as you possibly can in the you know, once 2020 is over. I think we all look forward to that. But you'll want to have that on hand so that you can speak to colleges and universities about those changes. You'll also report on the FAFSA both parent and student asset information, and assets include savings and checking and investment accounts. If you own other property, includes that. If you have 529 accounts that you are the owner of, but a student is the beneficiary of, that is still considered a parent asset, and that is to your benefit. But on the FAFSA, you will not report your primary home. You will not report any value of retirement accounts that is different than contributions you've made to retirement as income, but the asset portion of your retirement is not included. Life insurance is not included. And in most cases, small family businesses are not included. Unfortunately, debt is not included either. So consumer debt is not something that is able to be taken into consideration. So as I said, you know, the FAFSA is the main application, but some institutions will ask for another application, and that's the College Board Profile application. And this is generally a good thing, because if a college is asking for the profile application, it's usually because they have significant funds to distribute to students. So as the FAFSA will consider students for the federal dollars, there are limited federal dollars, and they're helpful for low-income families, but they typically don't go a lot farther than those low-income families. Some schools that have modest institutional funds will still use the FAFSA to distribute their institutional funds, but you know, there are a good number, a couple hundred schools that will use the profile. And this does go into more depth, but it is for the benefit of trying to stretch out dollars in ways that are really going to help families afford college. This application is online. It is a fee-based application, so it does cost a little bit of money, but it is well worth it in the long run, usually, in terms of what it can provide for students. It also becomes available on October 1st. And both of these applications, the FAFSA and the profile, the advantage to them being online is that they're smart applications. So they're continually refining the process to make sure that you only get asked questions that are likely to pertain to you. And so that helps reduce mistakes. So, you know, I would see that online process as being a good thing. Now, there's also a profile recording that MEFA offers. So just like the FAFSA, if you really want to go to in-depth on the profile, you know, you have the opportunity to do that. Now, it's the custodial parent that will start the application for a student. And one of the most important things is that if the student cannot get financial information from a parent, a non-custodial parent, a parent that they're not living with. Not that that parent doesn't want to fill out the forms, but if they're unable to, if it's a risk to the student to be in contact with that parent, every college and university has a process by which a student can ask for that information to be waived. So if this is a situation that you're worried about applying for financial aid because of a request for this information, definitely reach out. Reach out to a college financial aid person, reach out to MEFA, but get the information you need up front to be able to complete that waiver request, because it absolutely is worth your time. And it's important to us that we're making sure all students are getting access to important financial aid dollars. The other thing before I go on that I want to make sure that I mention is when you're filling out the profile and the FAFSA, and I really can understand how doing both of these applications at the same time is probably going to feel fairly overwhelming, and you probably need a break between them. But if you can fill out these applications close to each other, it really is to your advantage. You certainly want to make sure that when you're answering similar questions about income and assets, use the same numbers, because when numbers are different, if colleges are looking at that information as a financial aid professional, I have to ask myself, why is this information different? And I kind of need to stop, and I need to see which one should be correct, and I may need to reach out to you with an email that you may not see right away. So please do your best to provide consistent information in both of these applications to the extent that they overlap. The other thing is on the profile, the Social Security number is not required on this application, but I do encourage you to report it. These are secure applications. Colleges know how to protect your personally identifiable information and do it well. But having that information is an important identifier to making sure that a student's application is linked. So I will stop there for 1 second, Julie, just in case there are questions that we should address right now.
Let me see. I'll just ask you, I guess I'll just ask you this one because it's just a kind of a specific question, and you covered it, but just so, this person asked, boyfriend and her are not married, but wish to fill out the FAFSA for their daughter. They file taxes separately, but are they just filling out the same FAFSA? So I'll have you answer that one.
Right. So I think I heard that it's not the student's mother and father living in that household. And if that's the case, then the information.
I think it is actually. It's the parent. Yep.
Okay. So if a student's parents are not married to each other, but they are living together in the same household, even if they file separate tax returns, then both of those individuals' information will be reported on the FAFSA and will actually also be reported on the profile if that becomes applicable. Thank you. That's a good clarifying question. So after you apply, all of this information is sent electronically, which helps making sure it's not going through the mail. You do get a confirmation. The confirmation with the FAFSA is called a student aid report. And if you provide an email in the application, or if the student email, it will go by email. And if an email is not provided, it will go by mail. But I encourage you to review that information, make sure that nothing was reported in error. Certainly make sure you didn't add an extra zero to any of your financial numbers. And if you have any special circumstances, encourage you to be in touch with the financial aid office. With the FAFSA, you can make corrections. With the profile, you'll want to note there, the printout that you can print out at the end of the profile, note the correction, and then email or mail that in. This is also a time that I like to remind parents to check your email and also students. So we all get many emails. And so as a family, you want a communication plan. You want an arrangement with your child that if they get an email from a college or university, that they're going to be, quickly responding to that or quickly referring that to you. One of the stories that I like to tell is that, my daughter was not great about checking her email, and we found out after the fact that a school had offered her an application fee waiver. After I paid the fee waiver, she found the email. So I use that as my example to encourage you to remind your children that they should be looking at their emails from colleges. I know that they get many. I'm actually surprised still at how many they get, but you don't want to miss free money at any point, and those application waivers can be helpful. So let's talk about the verification process. So this is kind of the quality check. It's very common. It's not a problem. But colleges need to verify the information that they get to make sure that they are being good stewards of certainly federal resources, which are your taxpayer dollars. And the federal aid program is a significant resource in our, federal system of resources that we give out. And so it really is an important responsibility to make sure that those dollars are being given out appropriately. So the collection of tax information and other, household information through a verification worksheet or other asset statements are the way that colleges and universities will collect that information. The easiest way to find out if this is applicable will be to go to the college's web portal for financial aid and see if any additional information is needed. One of the most common pieces that I see people forget is that with the tax information, because it's 2 years old, it's really easy to misplace or not keep a copy of the W-2. And the W-2 is one of the forms that schools may ask for, especially for students. So even if students don't file a tax return, they may be asked to submit a copy of their W-2. So one of the things that you can do right now is make sure that you are keeping W-2s for yourself and for your student, and make sure that you have that 2019 information as you go. So everybody comes from a different situation. I did say that the formula, it is formulaic and it's standardized, but there are special circumstances that families have. And so you do want to reach out. The process is not so rigid that, you being able to ask about special circumstances and provide that information will not, be helpful. So I do encourage you to reach out. I also encourage that as you're talking with colleges, ask some questions about how they may treat outside or private or external. They may call them different things, but scholarships that are not coming directly from the school or from federal and state resources, because you want to know the impact that that's going to have on the financial aid. And most colleges, they're accessible by phone and email. Some are offering chat now, but they usually are reaching out to the student. So this is a shift in communication from you being kind of the center as a parent and receiving all of this important financial and student-related academic information directly to the student receiving it. So that I appreciate that can be frustrating, and colleges are going to have different approaches. Some are more liberal in sharing information with their families and their parents. Others may be very strict and may say the student needs to authorize that. So look around, ask questions, and talk to your students about how they're sharing that information with you. All right, I'm going to keep going.
Gail, can I ask one more? Can I ask just a question about the special circumstances? Because I think probably more than one family is in this situation. Just the question about, applying for financial aid this year, they're going to be using 2019 tax information, but things have changed significantly since then because of COVID-19. And you mentioned the special circumstances, but anything else you can say about that, about the changes that have already happened?
Just be prepared, be organized, have the taxes done. The assets that you report are as of the day you file the form. So although the income information is lagging, your kind of current situation with assets is current. At schools, we are, well prepared and doing the best we can in a very kind of volatile environment, but our job is to help you. So just reach out and keep asking questions so that we can guide you the best possible.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's get into how some of these decisions are made. Where we start, and I know I talk too much, so I might try to speed it up a little bit because I know your attention span is probably limited. But this is my favorite part. So the process of determining a family's eligibility for financial aid starts with the cost of attendance. So I'm sure you're well versed in the sticker price, seeing the tuition and the fees and the room and board, and those what can be some very large numbers. But the cost of attendance for 1 year of college also includes expenses that students are going to incur outside of being billed for them: books and supplies, transportation if you live at a distance from the school, and personal expenses. So that whole cost of attendance can be available on the school's website, and that's where we start from a standpoint of determining financial aid. From there, we then strive to calculate, what can a family be reasonably expected to absorb for education over a long period of time. How is this an investment for you? The term or the label is, EFC is what you'll hear. That can be an expected family contribution, an estimated family contribution. Unfortunately, the word contribution is probably not your definition of contribution. When I hear contribution, I think voluntary. I think, what do I want to contribute to my local, church, or what do I want to contribute to the boosters or NPR? But this contribution is calculated a little bit differently. So as I started with, there's a federal formula that's used to determine the eligibility for federal aid, and then colleges may also use an institutional formula. So this is trying to level the playing field to determine kind of below what amount do families just not have the ability to contribute anything to college. And then as families rise in their resources, where do they have more and more discretion in what they potentially can contribute toward college, and then that translates into how colleges are distributing their resources. So unfortunately, this EFC figure is not necessarily going to be what you will pay, and I'll explain that in a minute, but you do want to have a base for what might my EFC be. So there are many calculators out there, but I encourage you to take a look at the MEFA calculator so that you can kind of start to get a sense of what schools may be looking at. If you want to dig into the EFC formula on a sleepless night, you can do that as well through the federal website. But remember that the EFC, this is an annual figure. So people are usually fairly surprised when they see it because it's not a measure of what your disposable income is at the end of any year. It is annual. You do need to refile the FAFSA and the profile each year So each year, it would be reassessed. So the good news is there, if your situation is changing, then your EFC will also change. One of the biggest changes that families have in their household is when they change from multiple children in college to one in college, or one in college to multiple. All right, so thinking about those formulas, if you start with that total cost of attendance and then subtract the family contribution, then you're left with a financial aid eligibility. And so it's this financial aid eligibility that you're hoping will be filled with resources from the school. But at a minimum, you should be preparing to contribute that family contribution in most cases. So let's talk about then how schools fill this. So this is the financial aid, barrel. This is kind of how the awarding process works. So in this example, this total cost is $45,000. And so the family portion of this cost goes in first. So let's say that your calculated contribution is $5,000. That's where we start. And then after that, a college or university may add in that merit aid. They may add in need-based aid, and then from there, maybe they'll add in some loans. But this is where we're layering all the different components of the different types of financial aid that I mentioned at the beginning. And we're slowly working our way up to the top. The question is, how far do we get? In this case, this example, based on the school's resources, they're not able to get all the way to the top. So what happens is there's unmet need, or there's an amount left at the top of that barrel. That who's that going to fall to? It's essentially going to fall to the family. Now, hopefully, maybe there's an outside external source, like an outside scholarship, that could fill that unmet need. But if that's not the case, then this family would be looking at needing to pay at least $10,000 to start. Now, how schools layer this is what varies. So a school that meets full demonstrated need would be a school that maybe they put the loan in first, maybe they put the work study, and then maybe they fill that barrel with grants and scholarships. So if you're looking for schools that are going to maximize financial aid eligibility, Google colleges and universities that meet full demonstrated need. And you'll get about 60 to 70 schools. They are very competitive schools, but that could be a good place to start. And then a very small, some schools, maybe a couple dozen schools, are able to offer financial aid without student loans. So maybe their financial aid packages include grants and scholarships and work study, but not student loans. Then that's an opportunity that potentially the student loan can be used to help support the family contribution. But the challenge in an example like this is that if the student loan is already part of the financial aid package, then you're going to need to look to another loan source. So the federal student loan should always be the first go-to if you do need to use loans. But there are private, options after that. So this family contribution, as I said, is the family's first responsibility. So after you've gotten a sense of what that family contribution is, the other thing that is different, but I encourage you to check out, is what's called a net price calculator. Every single college and university is required, if they award federal dollars, they have to have a net price calculator on their website. So if you take nothing else from this workshop tonight, I encourage you to look at colleges that your child is interested in and just go to their homepage and in the search bar, put net price calculator, and you should get right to that school's tool, which is designed to collect a little bit of information about families and then provide what grants and scholarships, what free money that college would offer your student. And then as a result of that, what amount would the net price be for you? Now, it's possible that that net price will also include some of these loans and work, but it is good to see, what is kind of the all-in potentially from school to school. I encourage you to do it at a few different schools to see if you see differences. Some schools will ask academic information in these net price calculators to try to estimate what merit aid a student might get. So this is a way to really illustrate the affordability of a school. Not all net price calculators are created the same. Some are more robust than others. Some of them ask many more questions than another, but I encourage you to start exploring that, because it is designed to be, a useful tool well in advance of when you actually receive the financial aid information. So here's where we, just talk about the difference between schools. So the totals that are offered between schools really can vary. And sometimes they vary because schools have different resources. Sometimes they vary because their priority for students is different. Sometimes they can vary based on the timeliness of an application. So that is further reason why submitting applications by the due date is important. Another way that information can vary is by the type of funds that are included in a financial aid package. And so you want to look very closely, because if you line up 3 schools and they're all the same award, you say, okay, it's going to cost us maybe the same amount, so we can choose whichever school. You want to look really closely to see what was the difference in that free money, the grants and scholarships, versus loan money. And I hope that the number's decreasing, but some schools, you really want to pay attention to, some schools will include parent loans in a financial aid award letter. And the purpose of that is altruistic in the sense that they want to show you that you can afford that school. However, parent loans are absolutely not guaranteed. You need to apply for a parent loan, you need to be approved for a parent loan, and certainly you need to be willing to take and repay a parent loan. So usually if you see that in an award letter, I'd scratch it out, adjust the total, and pay really close attention to that. You'll see in this example, College C doesn't even offer any grants and scholarships. That also could be indicative of a very late application. So, again, be mindful of those dates. Due to time, I want to make sure that I have good time to answer your questions. I'm always happy to go back later. So I'm going to probably go a little bit quickly through the paying for college, because you're not there yet. And MEFA has some great resources when you get to the point of deciding about colleges and how to kind of put together a financing plan. MEFA has even more resources and webinars to do that. And who knows, maybe we'll even be in person by then. But it's not as I said at the start, it's not a single bullet for resources. It's not a single bullet when it comes to a financing plan. So you want to think of it as a multifaceted approach and putting together that plan. I will emphasize that having a start to a conversation now is really important. And sitting down, we call these kitchen table conversations, because it's an opportunity to, set expectations with your student. If you have a certain mindset about how higher education should be paid for, share that with your child so that they can make the best decision possible when it comes time to make that decision. If you've got limitations on how much you can pay, there are lots of reasons for that. You shouldn't feel bad about that, but you want to make sure that you're setting your kids up for success and to make the best decisions possible. So being open and transparent, talking about the long term, talking about a 4-year picture, making sure that students aren't just focusing on getting through 1 year, but what is the graduation? What's a typical graduation timeline for a student? Are the schools that students looking at, do most students graduate in 4 years, or do most students graduate in 5 or 6 years? Because that could alter how that conversation goes. But one of the most distressing things to me as a financial aid professional is that every single year I have a student who will come into my office in the fall. Maybe it's the fall of their sophomore year, maybe it's the fall of their junior year, and they will say, you know, nothing has changed in my family situation, but my parents can no longer help. You know, they can no longer pay for college. What can I do? And I don't have a good answer. You know, I have great answers when families have had changes in their circumstances. But if all of the information was clear, and if our offer of financial aid was clear based on the information we had from the beginning, then that's what should be expected for 4 years. And for a student to be confronted with the only option is to borrow, you know, considerable amounts, upwards of $100,000 or more, that's just not a good plan. So kind of knowing what that 4-year picture is up front is really important. To that end, there are some really great affordable options in Massachusetts. There is the Mass Transfer, where you can transfer from a community college to a 4-year public college, and that can, you know, make those options much more affordable. There's also options for out-of-state programs, and I encourage you to kind of look at those. I'm going to hit on some resources, and then we're going to get to your questions, because you've been very, very patient, and I can't see whether you're falling asleep on me, but I hope you're not. The FAFSA Day I mentioned, and encourage you to pay attention or look up those dates. So the website is listed here, and there are dates in November and December and January and February online, as well as free resources with the educational opportunity centers. So this is just kind of a summary of what you can do now. The MEFA emails, I encourage you to sign up for them, because they're not intrusive, they're helpful, they're brief, they're short. Go out and get that FSA ID, as I said. Do some research, sign up for some more events. Also use social media for the tidbits, and certainly reach out with your questions. MEFA is there for you by phone, by web, by email, and I'll put one plug in for completing the survey when you get it tomorrow or after this, so that MEFA can continue to refine their presentation materials and what's offered to you in terms of what's going to be the most helpful, and also asking us as financial aid professionals to join you. So, Julie, what kind of questions can we address?
Yes, I was going to say, you know, Gail, I can attest to the fact that people are not asleep. There are lots of questions, so let me give you a couple. So one question is, someone asked, well, what if I fill out the FAFSA and the profile on different days, which, as you mentioned, is very common because it's a lot to do at once. And those asset numbers, you said you complete your asset, you put in your asset figure on the day you complete the form. What happens if those don't match because it's done on different days?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would take it in the spirit of the question being asked. So the question is roughly what's your checking account look like on a normal day? If you were to fill out that question potentially the day after you get paid, it may be a different question than what's at the end of the month. The general idea is, what kind of savings and investments do you have? It probably doesn't vary by tens of thousands of dollars. So I'm sure if you're close, within hundreds or 1,000, that will be fine.
That's great. And then in speaking about the number in college and how to answer that question, can grad students be included in that number in college?
Good question. So on the FAFSA, grad students, children who are in graduate school, if you're supporting them, can be included. Parents who are in graduate school are not included in the number in college. And for the profile application, graduate students are typically, not included in that institutional methodology. There's also a distinction between the federal methodology and the institutional methodology in terms of how students are adjusted. What's the adjustment in your family contribution for having multiple students in college? You should expect it to cost you more if you have 2 students in college at the same time, but you should also, qualify for more financial aid at each institution. So the other thing that I will put in a plug for is if you have multiple students in college and then one graduates, plan for the financial aid to change based on that. But if you are concerned at all about what are the downstream effects for financial aid in years 2 or years 3 with those kinds of changes, certainly ask the financial aid person. I am always willing to have as in-depth as conversation as people are willing to have with me. So the more you want to know, great. If you don't want to know the details, that's fine too. But we can usually try to project out if there aren't big changes. What might that look like with changes in the number in college?
That's great. And I have a very specific question. It's a question about dependency status, but I thank this person for asking it so specifically because I think it's a question we get often. So I'm going to read it as asked. Now let me find it again. Sorry about
that. The dependency questions are tough. And
so
they can be challenging.
So if my daughter is now living on her own and we will not declare her on our 2020 taxes, what will be, how will she be considered for financial aid? She's 21, or she will be 21.
So let's start with the federal. In terms of the FAFSA, the dependency questions are quite clear. They are, a student is considered independent if they are over 24, if they are in a graduate program, if they are married, if they are supporting a child, not have a child, but supporting a child, and if they're a veteran of the armed forces, and if they are an orphan or ward of the court or under legal guardianship. And so students who are younger than 24 and living on their own would not meet the federal definition of being independent. If there are circumstances that are extraordinary, I would encourage you to reach out to the financial aid office. From an institutional perspective, it's even less common for a student who does not have exceptional circumstances to be considered independent. So unfortunately, not being, not supporting a student isn't in itself a reason for colleges to consider a student independent.
Thank you. And another question, if a student decides not to apply early action or early decision, will all the funds be exhausted by the time the regular decision pool rolls around?
Yeah, the whole, that's a good question. And it is, early decision, early action, how to apply, when to apply. These are tough questions. Colleges are crafting, trying to give out, plan their enrollment the best they can. So early decision and early action are important programs for knowing, their budgeting and how much they're going to spend. So early decision you should be looking for financial aid information to be offered at the time of admission. And you want to make sure that you're meeting the deadlines, the financial aid deadlines that go along with that particular program. But when we get to regular decision, colleges and universities still have to offer financial aid to all kinds of students if they want to meet their enrollment goals. So it's hard for me to answer that with certainty because I could make a case for students getting more financial aid in the early process. I can also make a case for students getting more money in the regular decision process, because if institutions aren't meeting their enrollment goals, unfortunately, sometimes they're offering more money the later you go. So I hate to say it depends, but unfortunately that's the answer. I would stick with, what's best for your child. What are they interested in? If they've got a good school that they've got their heart set on and they want to attend, then let them, apply early and see what happens. And if students don't know where they want to apply, that's okay too. There will be colleges and opportunities out there for them. It pained me that my own child wasn't sure exactly where she wanted to apply. But she found a wonderful home, and it worked out perfectly. So I know it's aggravating or stress inducing, but the most important thing is what's going to be a good match. And there are 4,500 colleges and universities in this country, and I am confident that students can find a good match.
That's great. Are cars included as an asset?
No, cars, unless I guess you're a collector of cars, and that's, a significant portion of your asset portfolio, in which case you're probably not applying for financial aid. But generally speaking, no, I would not. When you're asked about investments, I would be thinking about stocks and bonds and mutual funds. When you're asked about real estate, I'd be thinking about properties. Yeah, not cars. Not cars. I wouldn't get into paintings and things like that unless they're significant.
Can you talk again? You may have covered this a little bit, but a couple of people asked. Can you repeat why students should put in their social security number? There's just a little bit of anxiety about putting your social security number online, all of that. What's the benefit of that?
Yeah, I mean, you're not really putting it online. You're putting it in an application, and all of these applications are coming into an internal system that a college has, and so larger schools may have 2 applications for students with a similar name, and so it is that distinct social security number that's going to match the admission application with the financial aid application, or the record. So at some schools, they may not even create sort of a electronic record until they get an admission application. Some, you file the FAFSA, which needs to have a social security number on it. You want to make sure that the profile is matched in a timely fashion. Because if it's not, then colleges have to have a whole system where they're going through, looking at records, making sure that it's really the right Sally Smith with the ones that they have, and that takes time, and so it can slow down your ability to know if the application is in fact complete. The other thing that I'll just throw in right here, because I think I forgot to say it, is because the FAFSA is free, certainly apply, submit it to any schools that you think your child may be applying to. The profile, because the profile is not free, I do encourage you to wait until your child has decided that they're actually going to apply to a school. They, as 18-year-olds, it seems like change their mind quite frequently. And so there's no point in paying for an application if they're really not planning on submitting a request or an admission application.
And maybe you can talk about the difference between the FAFSA and the profile here. This person is asking to verify that primary residence and parents' 401k are not included on the financial aid forms.
So I think by the question of residence, they mean home ownership.
Primary home, yeah.
So the primary home ownership is not considered on and not asked for on the FAFSA. It is asked for on the profile, because the point of the profile is to get a more specific representation of a family's financial ability and their financial health. So the FAFSA can really be broad, because it doesn't collect a lot of, it cannot collect a lot of information because there's not a lot of resources. Essentially, the free money that you get from FAFSA or by filing the FAFSA is essentially the federal Pell Grant. And that is targeting families that roughly have incomes that are in the range of $50,000 or less. So it doesn't matter whether your income is 80 or 150. But if you're submitting the profile and colleges are giving out their resources, there could be a very big difference between a family's ability with a family of 5 of 80,000 and a family of 5 of 200,000 in income. And so the questions about home are relevant. In terms of the retirement, because I think you mentioned that too, Julie, the retirement as an asset is not part of the formula. The profile does ask some questions about retirement, which are really just gauging a reference point. It is not part of the formula. But what families are contributing toward their retirement in a tax year, so what you've taken out of your paycheck to put into retirement in that 1 year, is part of your overall financial health that is considered in that year. Sometimes families that have not been able to save for retirement are considered in a more favorable way through the institutional formula on an appeal basis. So, anytime you receive a financial aid package, and if you say, wow, we just can't make this cost work, I would have a conversation about what are the circumstances that you're thinking about that are presenting struggle for you, and then talk to the financial aid office to find out if any of your struggles are something that can be taken into consideration. We talked a little bit about changes in income, but maybe you have large expenses. Maybe you're trying to support parents in their elder years and expenses that you have for them. Maybe there's circumstances where you have high medical expenses. Those are sometimes things that colleges can take into consideration. You will need to provide documentation, so you will want to collect that and kind of have it on the ready. But I would encourage you to keep that available.
Thank you. And I know we're way past the hour, but I'll ask just a couple more questions. This one is, if, I believe I probably won't qualify for financial aid. Should I apply anyway? Are there reasons why it's good to have a FAFSA on file or complete the FAFSA?
Yeah, I mean, I do encourage anybody to apply from the start. You never know when things may change, and then that application is good for the whole year. In terms of the FAFSA, you cannot apply or receive a federal student loan or a federal parent loan without a FAFSA on file. So that just keeps your options open. The FAFSA is free, so there's really no reason not to file it. There are some schools that may award merit aid to families that actually don't qualify for need-based aid, so that's another reason to apply. Usually scholarship agencies, want to see that you've applied. It may be part of their process. So at least once. If you do an EFC calculator and it comes back with, a crazy number like $100,000, then maybe, you're not going to apply, or not going to qualify. But you just never know what the circumstances are at any individual institution. So I always think it's a good idea to apply.
And how do colleges view or deal with the situation where the family is refusing to foot the bill?
Yeah, I sigh because it's tough. Again, this is part of being open and honest and transparent with your students and your kids, so that they can, make a decision. Colleges don't pick up the bill just because families say they're not going to pay. So they just can't, they just can't. So we don't want any student to have their hearts broken, and we want students to be able to make the best decision. And there are affordable options out there.
Great. All right, and then there are just two profile questions that I'll ask. One is, can you just describe fee waiver versus fee payment code? Again, the difference between those two, and then I'll ask you the other one.
Yes, so the College Board offers fee waivers to low-income students and families. And so if first of all, if a student has received a fee waiver for the SAT, then they'll receive a fee waiver for the profile. So use the student should sign in for the profile, and then they can use that waiver to complete it. And students who qualify for a fee waiver can apply to as many colleges as they want, or send the profile, I should say, to as many colleges as they want for free. A fee payment code is where a third-party entity has purchased the fee code and gives it to a student to use at a certain institution. So an institution may purchase codes to give out to certain applicants that can be used at only that school. Sometimes maybe scholarship agencies will purchase codes. Maybe high schools will purchase codes in a way to be helpful to families. So the fee payment code can only be used at certain institutions and are provided by another entity.
Thank you. I think we've covered most of the questions, Gail. If there are some questions that we didn't get to, the information is right there, the 800 number, collegeplanning@mefa.org. So please feel free to follow up with us. But you've given us so much good information. Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's good social media sites, and feel free to fill out a review. So we appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you all.